Let's talk about these brothers. Tell me a little bit about that, because there was a huge video you did about it, went completely viral, but I've almost not heard about this at all outside of that.
Yep. So these were the Badreddin brothers who came to Britain with their family, I believe their mother and father, several years ago. And it was almost in that kind of first wave of Syrian refugees. It was around the same time that Angela Merkel threw the doors open to Germany, and then obviously we accepted a proportion of people as well. What's happened here is that they ended up in Newcastle. They were part of a BBC Newsnight documentary, which was ironically called To Hell and Back. And that documentary featured their initial arrival, their journey, the perceived racism that they faced in the local area. There was then a trial from one of the brothers who was accused of sexually assaulting a minor. He denied this. He was found not guilty at the time. And this then led to the documentary To Hell and Back. However, the BBC was accused actually of sitting on these accusations initially whilst they were doing the documentary and revealing them towards the end. Unfortunately for the BBC, what happened was later on, Omar Badreddin and his brother were found guilty of multiple counts of the R word, which obviously I won't say because we're on YouTube.
Assaults.
At the moment. Yeah, everyone knows what we're talking about here. Of children, brutally, drugging, plying them with alcohol. This was a young girl. They were part of a Syrian refugee grooming gang, okay? They were sentenced to, I think it's 18 years and 13 years, respectively, in prison. They are serving that time. There appears to be little to no conversation about whether or not they will be deported, by the way, when they are released. I mean, it seems impossible to. How could we possibly now deport someone back to Syria? You know, it would be impossible, especially with the government that we've got in charge now. So that was a case where our national state broadcaster initially appeared to be tripping over itself to do a PR job that covered both bases, which is that what a lovely bunch of Syrian refugees these people are. There was at the time, false accusations, though the BBC did not challenge the Badreddin brother when he said that this girl made the accusations because she was a racist.
Wow.
And because she didn't like Muslims.
Poor girl.
They did not challenge that. Now, in that scenario, he was found not guilty. Now, because of the anonymity of this girl, I don't know if it's then the same girl who's then later he's been found guilty of. Fine. But the BBC did not challenge that. They obviously had a narrative, in my view, that they wanted to spin. And then they were found with egg on their face. Now, when it emerged that these two brothers had been sentenced, we got wind of this story. I broke it, ran it, we put it out there, and it went absolutely massive. And it was only after we'd contacted the BBC for a right of reply to why they had essentially done a PR job for a Syrian grooming gang that they then put a story on their news site about it. Now, given that they'd done an initial BBC Newsnight documentary thing on it, you would have thought that they would give that due prominence as well, but of course it doesn't fit their narrative.
There's just so much swimming around my head with that. And I know it's going to make people feel really angry, but it just feels like the BBC must be, to some extent, ideologically captured. And that's going to happen increasingly, isn't it? Yeah,
and there are other examples of this. So the Telford grooming gang scandal, which at the time was the largest grooming gang scandal in the UK, absolutely horrific situation there. More than 1,000, mostly vulnerable, young, working class, underage white girls with troubled backgrounds and home lives, systematically abused on an industrial scale by predominantly British Pakistani men in the area. The BBC put that story, when it broke, as something like the third story on their local Shropshire news page. So that's the UK's at the time. Yeah, if you wanted to find out by consuming your news through our national broadcaster about what was at the time the UK's largest ever grooming gang scandal, you would have had to have gone to their Shropshire news page and scroll down a bit. Now, why? There's no way that you can tell me that the BBC do not think that that's a massive story. Let's flip that on its head. Let's say that there were and obviously I absolutely hope this doesn't happen, and I will caveat this by saying that the majority of sex offenders in Britain are white British, because that's the demographics here, right? And that's a problem, okay? So I want to make that very clear. But if we had flipped this on its head and there was, 1,000 plus Asian underage girls who had been systematically abused by a gang of like white taxi drivers, yeah. Well, are you honestly telling me that they wouldn't have led with that on their news page? I'm convinced they would have done. So it implies to me that there was an attempt to bury that story. And why would they do that? Well, cultural sensitivities. We wouldn't want to be seen to be stoking racial tensions. And we have seen that in police reports from other grooming gang situations around the Yorkshire area, where it's come out in inquiries that police have said, we didn't actually investigate this as thoroughly as we possibly could have done because we were afraid of, that phrase again, stoking racial tensions. Now, to which I would politely suggest, is that the price you're willing to pay for young working class white girls being abused on an industrial scale? Is that what you'll sell yourself for, is it? That fear of stoking racial tensions, or maybe someone calling you a nasty word. And your fear of that, you were willing to trade off whilst however many girls go through hell and back, don't they? Unlike the Badreddin brothers.
This is the test, isn't it? Because I know we all have that feeling of being 17 and you're learning about, or 15 maybe, that slavery, or you're learning about Anne Frank, and you go, gosh, if I were in those times, I would have told everybody, like, hey, you shouldn't keep slaves. You shouldn't have to hide Jews in an attic or such and such. But what we don't realize is it was a different time. And if you'd said that, if you'd said to your friend, don't keep slaves, you'd have gotten all sorts of abuse. You'd have been thrown out of your social circle. And it takes real courage. And the test today is, are you going to expose these abuses of young girls? But you might face some difficulties and criticism from some friends, and most people fail it.
But I don't understand what the problem is. And maybe there's something wrong with me, right? Maybe I've got a little bit of a issue here, but I cannot understand what the controversy is here.
You don't want to seem racist.
Have these people committed this crime? If the answer to that is yes, then just report it. We report other crimes every single day.